Rod, thanks for getting this high enough for me. Can you guys hear me? Can you? Okay. So several years ago, I was introduced to Wendell Berry. And a few months before we started this series on sustainability and Mother Earth and so on, I decided to go back and I thought it would be a good idea to reread some of the stuff that I did years ago. I'm glad that I did. Wendell Berry, born in 1934, still alive, is a writer whose life's work has, in his words, been dedicated to, and I quote, "what I value most in the world, the life and health of the earth, the peacefulness of human communities and households." Poet, novelist, essayist, and activist, Berry speaks for a culture of stewardship and husbandry, for the welfare of rural people, often forgotten and marginalized, and for the vital role of sustainable farming in preserving Mother Earth and our national character. His writing combines the authority and wisdom of experience. He has lived and farmed a hilly acreage in Henry County, Kentucky for more than half a century. My meditation is drawn from an essay titled "The Long-Legged House," written in 1969. Berry's family, immigrants from Ireland, spanning at least 4 generations, lived in or near Port Royal, Kentucky. His great-uncle, Kieran Matthews, built a cabin of 2 small rooms along the Kentucky River near Port Royal, which expressed both his eccentricity and need to be in the wild, away from civilization. The cabin was referred to as the Long-Legged House because it was built in an attempt to survive the annual river floods, which it failed to do so on many occasions. Although the floods did not destroy the cabin, it often moved it from its original foundation. Wendell came to know the cabin as the camp, and its place involved a delight that was associated with no other place in his growing years. Over the years, the river had its way with the camp and routinely fell into disuse and neglect. One night, at age 14, Wendell decided to spend the night at the camp using a sleeping bag on the porch. That experience, for some reason, began a conscious relation between him and the camp that lasted for decades. What he found initially, but only briefly and sporadically by being at the camp, was a peace that suggested the possibility of a greater, more substantial peace, a decent, open, generous relation between a man's life and the world. Of course, he wrote in the male gender mostly, and that was the time then. Today he would probably expand that. So sort of disregard when I refer to that. Over time, this peace had more consciously come to be the hope and ruling idea of his life. Over many years, Wendell returned to the camp during the summers of his early and collegiate school years to clean and fix it up and to occupy it until he needed to return to the civilized world. Later, with a new bride, they fully restored and updated the camp, which became their first home during the early years of his professional life. He said that the history of the camp is the possibility of showing how a place and a person can come to belong to each other, or how a person can become to belong to a place, for places really belong to nobody. He came to recognize that we are the belongings of Mother Earth, not its owners, which implies a humility and suggests that each of us is part of a succession. Over his many days and years at the camp, he began to think of himself as living within rather than upon the life of the place. He began to think of his life as one among many, and one kind among many kinds. He began to see how both the beauty and the richness of the world as originating from humans was both superficial, crude, and destructive, even self-destructive. Over time, he came to the conclusion that his nativeness to place must undergo a renewal of meaning, that if he belonged to a place, it was not because anything there belonged to him. If he belonged to a place, it was because he belonged to it. But to fully belong, he needed to deeply know and understand the place, like the wild creatures who belong to place by nature. So he ambitioned to belong through understanding and virtue. He came to think that this quest upon which he embarked was a spiritual ambition, like goodness. I want you to hear now, these are direct quotes, some of Barry's reflections as he progressed this spiritual journey. I quote, "I spent many days and nights of watchfulness and silence here. I learned the power of silence in a place, a silence that is the imitation of absence, that permits one to be present as if absent, so that life of the place goes its way undisturbed. It proposes an ideal of harmlessness. A man should be in the world as though he were not in it, so that it would be no worse because of his life, by making his absence the model of his presence. But there was not only the power of silence, there was also the power of attentiveness, of permanence, of interest. I had, in a sense, made a marriage with the place. I had established a trust. And with the assurance of the trust, the place had begun to reveal its life to me in moments of deep intimacy and beauty. I had become worthy to see what I had inherited by being born here. I had been a native, now I was beginning to belong. To be a native in the fashion of the birds and the animals. I had begun to be born here in mind and spirit as well as in body. Now, if you'd like, close your eyes and listen to Barry's attentiveness as you imagine something of the same in your own places. And I quote, "That spring, a pair of phoebes nested under the eaves in front of the house, just above the door to the screened porch. A dead elm branch reaching over the porch made them a handy place to sit and watch for insects. I would watch them fly out, pick an insect out of the air, and return to the branch. Sometimes I could hear their beaks snap when they made a catch. Another time, wood thrushes lived in the thicker woods upriver. They never came near the house while I was there, but their music did, as though their feeling toward me was both timid and generous. One of the unforgettable voices of this place is the exultant fluting rising out of the morning shadows. Another, toward the end of that December, a gray squirrel began building a nest in a hollow sycamore near the house. He seemed unable or unwilling to climb the trunk of the sycamore, but he always followed the same complicated route to his nest, up a grapevine, through the top of an elm, and then by a long leap into the sycamore. On the way down, this route offered him no difficulties, but the return trip, when he carried a load of sycamore leaves in his mouth, seemed fairly risky. The big leaves gave him a good deal of trouble. He frequently stopped and worked his forepaws to make the load more compact. But because he persisted in carrying as big loads as he could, his forward vision seemed usually to be blocked altogether. I believe that his very exacting leaps were blind by memory after a bit of calculation beforehand. When he moved with a load of leaves, apparently because of the obstruction to his vision, he was extremely wary, stopping often to listen and look around. Finally, and I quote, "I remember I began to think of myself as living within rather than upon the life of this place. I began to think of my life as one among many and one kind, among many kinds. I began to see how little of the beauty and the richness of the world is of human origin. May we, as we attempt to live and respond to Mother Earth's call to restore and repair her, be more patient, more kind, and more attentive."